I had one that I could just pick up, Harmony, but she got ate by a coyote. It's just a lifestyle for me, and the little things of, just watching a blue heron come in and grab a couple crawdads out of the pond, or waking up in the morning and seeing a wood duck out here with a whole group of little babies, or just the little things that happen.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. I'm here with a longtime friend, Mark Cooper, who's handyman and construction and do everything in the physical universe work has made big difference on our homestead. We're at his homestead in the town of Rough and Ready near Grass Valley, California. Mark, thanks for joining me. It's going to be so many stories that we have to share. Tell me, when did you move here? How big is this? What was it like?
Wow, well, that's a good question. I moved here about 9 years ago. This place was very different than it was right now. It was really run down. It was an old farmhouse that was basically literally falling down.
Really?
And the land was very different than you see it now. It was very overgrown and just very unkept. And in the last 9 years, I've just been working at it, and it's kind of gotten to a point where it's a pretty good little system.
So specifically, what kind of changes did you make sort of overall? I mean, fences or ground or water, like that?
Yeah, well, you're always up against what's important, and when you don't have running water and your roof is caving in, you kind of tend to tackle those things first. But then, after that, it was working with the land and just kind of designing the whole system based on the lifestyle that I was trying to live.
So here on the pasture, what's now pasture area, what was this like?
Yeah, this was waist-high weeds, and right now we would be standing in the middle of a blackberry patch. You can look way down the pasture there and you can see the remnants of where my property ends. And we first started out with a couple goats, and they were surprisingly really well at eating blackberries right down to the roots. Yeah.
Wow, so they were your first ground clearers.
Yes,
with goats.
They would beat the brush back to the point where I could actually get at the root crowns and dig them out. And
wow.
From there, just a process of putting in irrigation and reseeding and irrigating and reseeding, and just being conscious of trying to bring the grass to a point.
And what did you have, you said, in terms of this waterway that we see here? What was that originally?
Well, it was just kind of a sloughy little mess full of cattails and mosquitoes, and there was always a good amount of water running there, but because it was so gobbed up and there was no dam or anything there, it was just kind of unusable water.
So you built the dam?
Built the dam, built the ponds, had a friend come in with a backhoe and just kind of worked at it, and just been working with cleaning out the water courses and redirecting things so in a way that it enhanced the water.
Do you use that water for irrigation or just for the ponding?
No, that water is actually just runoff. Right behind us here, there's an irrigation canal that runs around the top of this property, which has been a blessing and a curse. And we're lucky enough to catch a lot of that runoff, and instead of having it just run down through the pasture where it was mud and cattails, I've decided to kind of turn it into some nice waterways.
Well, Mark, the animals have been a big part of what you're saying, and so tell us what this is.
This is the Goose Grotto. I started raising geese primarily because I have a lot of grass, and grass is a thing I can raise here for free without any additional chemicals or fertilizers, and geese eat grass.
Okay.
So I started raising geese, and then of course the coyotes started eating the geese.
Okay.
They had it all worked out where they would come and yip and chase them across, and it'd be one waiting there and goodbye geese. So in my MacGyver mode, I found a bunch of old pipe and some old clamps from woodworking, and I created this little thing I call the Goose Grotto. And
so it's a kind of a cage. It's kind of a
it's kind of an enclosure.
An enclosure. So how do they get protected?
Well,
can you bring them in?
Yeah, I can probably get them to come in here if you like.
Sure.
Let's see if we can put a little feed in here. Goose, goose.
So you got a little door down there, and they can just scoot through, which is too small for the coyote.
Right, and the coyotes generally won't swim through that. I can actually close it at night. The biggest thing is when they're nesting, and I have this little island here made out of an old skylight you might even recognize.
I do recognize that.
And
so they just nest under?
They nest under there, and I have a couple 5-gallon buckets that I cut in half and put in there at a little slope, and in the spring I put straw in there. And then that way they've got a protected area to raise their young, and I can kind of keep track of them that way. And it's worked out really nice.
So you raise the geese partly to crop your grass, but for goose eggs.
For goose eggs, and I'll tell you, if you've never had a goose egg before, which I know you have,
I have.
they are awesome.
I wrote about it in my blog. I drew pictures. Those
Yeah.
goose eggs are huge and delicious.
They are just
wonderful.
something different.
Wonderful.
I mean, I've eaten duck eggs before, I've eaten turkey eggs, but I think goose eggs are just the best. So aside from geese, you know, like I said, grass is important. I got my friends here that eat grass, and I've had a lot of different guys here. Originally I started with goats, like I said, to eat the blackberries, but then soon I had no blackberries. So I ended up moving into sheep, and I've had Tibetan yaks. I've had all kinds of...
Tibetan yak?
Tibetan
Really?
yak, yeah.
What-
Lots
I
of
mean,
interesting
how
animals.
How big is, well, tell me what else. Tibetan yaks, sheep, goats.
Yeah, I've had some horses here for a while. Of course, they're pretty much pasture pets that are, in my mind, other than aesthetics and beautiful animals, they don't contribute much to the table unless you want to eat them. But the sheep have worked out really well for me. The biggest problem with sheep, of course, is predators, and that is an issue. So
it was just what, coyote here?
mostly coyotes, and I have seen mountain lions walking down this thing here.
Who
But,
else? Let's see. Trying to think of-
Turkeys, I've had turkeys, I've had ducks, chickens, and in the past, but not on this land, I've raised pigs as well. My neighbors raised pigs here too. And
So at one time, how many animals, when you had a lot of animals going? How
at
many?
one point in time, we had at least 50 different, or 50 animals total here.
That's a lot. I mean,
Yeah,
you
it
had
was
to
a
buy
lot.
feed, I would expect.
We definitely
for
had to
them.
buy feed, and you know, that's the thing with animals, is you can kind of get sucked into making them pets. And as much as this guy right here, he was just born this spring. I call him Friendly, but Friendly is destined for the freezer, and that's just how it is when you're trying to, you know, do a sustainable situation. You can't make everything a pet.
So you have to deal with, do you do your own slaughter?
I do. It's the least favorite part of the job, and you know, the thing I can say about it, once the dirty work's done and when you sit down to the table, you know, you remember the entire process. I remember the day he was born and his sister, and you remember the whole thing, and it makes you so much more in touch with your food source, and I don't know, it's just a way of being.
And I would expect a kind of gratitude for that being to, I mean, you're eating, you said to me earlier, you're eating your friends.
Yeah, you're eating your friends, and
Ooh,
it's
that's
tough.
hard. That's
It's tough to
hard.
do, but I'll tell you, the level of connectedness and the level of appreciation that you have it's just hard to describe. You have to experience it, and there are hard parts to it. There's dirty work to be done. There's things that are hard. Sometimes animals get killed. Sometimes they get hurt, and it's just part of life.
So you've reduced the number of animals that you have right now. Partly the coyote has helped you do that, and
Yes.
so on. Looks like you've sort of honed your process down to sort of what's manageable for right now. Is that-
Yeah, you know, I've experimented with pretty much everything that I could get my hands on, and for me that was part of the process. But what I've come down to for this small land base, that sheep and geese have been the two things that have really worked for me. You know, you butcher a sheep, something like him right here, he'll put about maybe 45 pounds worth of meat in the freezer. I may raise a couple cows next year, but you know, it's the kind of thing when I butcher a steer, it's a 1.5-year project, and you got 400, 450 pounds of meat. So,
That's more than,
Yeah.
you know, one household is going to need.
right,
Why don't you take me to the orchard? I'd like to see what you've got going there.
okay.
Hi there. Hi there.
Yeah, you be nice. You be a good boy. You are a good boy, but you're just a little too rambunctious.
Well, that's what you get for being a ram, huh?
You know, there was probably more trees here than you see right now, and they were very poorly laid out. They were very close together. A lot of them had diseases, some of them still do, and I basically even hired a specialist to come out and look at it, and he told me, you know, best thing to do is to start replacing them, so that's what I've done. So I do have a few different trees here that are pretty old, and some of them have some pretty major problems, but they're still producing. And
Like that apple tree,
Like
right?
this apple tree right here.
It's amazing how much bounty that has still got on it.
Yeah, this
Here we
thing's-
are at October.
yeah,
Doing
and I've already
wonderfully.
picked 90% of the apples off it, but this tree has some fire blight problems, and you know, it has some major issues, and probably I should cut it down, but you know, at the same time, it's still producing, and
So
If
what
it
else?
works.
What else do you have here in the orchard? What else do you? what
well,
are we
we've
looking
got we got 3 different types of apples. Actually, there's Granny Smith. There's a red apple there that I don't even know what it is. It's just an old heirloom apple. It's really good. This is a Yellow Delicious, which is also one of my
yeah.
favorites, and I love Fuji's. And That little tree right there is actually 2 years old now, and it's doing really well. And it's tough to take a tree and cut it off a foot from the ground to force that crown out and to really do all those things, but you got to do it.
And it's doing it.
And it's doing it. It's doing well. I got a little Bartlett pear here. I've got an Asian pear that has 3 varieties of Asian pears grafted onto it, which is kind of cool.
And so what do you do with all this fruit?
Yeah, well, that's one thing you really want to think about when you plant fruit trees. A standard tree will produce so much fruit, it's ridiculous. I mean, you'll have wheelbarrows full, and it's really easy to get carried away with planting a bunch of fruit trees and then create nothing but a nightmare for yourself.
Because you've got too much all at once.
Too much of anything is not a good thing. Pretty much what I've learned is that you're going to get a good fruit crop probably every other year. And so I try to do a lot of preserving and stuff, so I have 2 years worth of stuff.
Okay. And so what kind of preserving do you do?
Well, I've done a lot of different types, and there's pros and cons to all of it. You know, there's your traditional canning type stuff. That's great. The problem with it is it takes a lot of energy to can it. You're also destroying a lot of nutrients from heat. The good thing about it is once it's done, it stores for a long time. Another way of doing it is freezing stuff. You know, yeah, that's quick and easy, but then it requires energy to keep it in suspension for a long time. My favorite all-time way of preserving food has pretty much become drying. I do a lot of different things, but I have a little food dryer here to show you if you want to check it out.
I've been waiting for this. Let's go.
Okay.
I'm really wanting to know about the dryer because, like you, I found that canning takes a lot of energy, and I think drying is the way to go, dried fruit.
Yeah.
So this is, I'm pleased.
So this is the dryer right here. This is basically my brainchild of a bunch of things that I had laying around, and what I had some old sliding glass door panels.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, well, I can make a solar collector out of that. So I laid one on the ground. I took some tin and screwed it together and made like a collector inside here.
That's the metal that we see.
The metal corrugated metal.
Right.
So the sun shines through here and it heats this metal, and as the air gets hot, it draws that air up through here.
So there must be some kind of hole down here that...
Yes.
Oh, I see.
The air can flow up through the screens, and then there's an exhaust vent. This thing has actually come in handy in a lot of different ways. I've used it for putting little baby chicks out here. You know, times when you take them out of the hatcher and you're ready to have them start eating grass and stuff, but they still need a little warmth. I've used it to start seeds in the wintertime. You know, it's kind of come into handy for a lot of different things, as well as something that I designed it for. Anyway, you know, I've got about $60 invested in this thing, and
boy, the last of the big spenders.
Yeah, well,
Jeez.
Sometimes you got to do what you can with what you got.
Of course, absolutely.
I want to point this out right here, and I don't know if you can see this in the camera or not, but this is, you know, obviously siding that is dilapidating. I knew darn good and well when I built this thing that I was using some interior grade plywood, and I knew this was going to happen. But at the same time, it's like, look, I don't have the money to go out and buy new plywood. I had this. I just got some recycled paint and I painted it up, and you know, yeah, now I need to redo the whole thing, but bottom line is I got 4 years out of it.
I'm just saying, you got to, I mean, and you used what you had.
I used what I had, and I think that's really the name of the game. If you're going to go out and start buying new materials all the time, oftentimes you can buy something already made cheaper than you can build it. And so I just try to do the best you can with what you got. I think that's the whole name of the game.
And that's part of the handy person part of you that I really appreciate, is that you just figure some way to do it. I mean, I'm just looking at the angle iron, these little feet, and so you built some kind of main structure, what, like 2x4 or something to build a box?
These are actually off of an old drill press, the legs off of an old drill press that I inherited. These are some more sliding glass door panels that the heat actually hits this and absorbs heat as well.
And it goes, I see holes down there, so it's just going down so that it comes up the...
Yeah, heat rises, and that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to create a situation where you're drawing warm air through your dryer.
Oh, okay, so what I see here is you've got openings from both places and a screen down here.
Yeah, so there's this is just a rack with a series of screens. The $60 that I had to spend was to buy the screen, the screws, and some 2x2 spruce to build the frameworks. That's the only part I didn't have.
Wow.
This is actually an old aluminum screen door that I've spliced stuff onto. I mean, you know, gosh, it's a hard way to build something, but I had the time and I didn't have the money, so that's what you do.
And I see there's a vent at the top, so how does that work? And a fan?
Yeah, so sometimes I tend to overthink things, or I think it's got to be more complicated than it needs to be. So I did a remodel job and I found an old fan out of a range hood.
Okay.
And so I took it apart and I used the parts inside of it, and I mounted that in there. So I actually have an electric fan in there. basically, 99% of the time I never need it. There are times where if you got a lot of material in here that's really wet, all these racks are full,
All right.
then it really does help to have the airflow.
And
But
so you're just doing it to move the air
yeah,
in the
just
space?
to draw air, to move the air faster to evaporate. The problem with drying things is if they don't dry fast enough, they'll tend to mold.
Okay, all right.
And you don't want the
Right.
mold happening. But realistically, I think a person can take a cardboard box with a piece of screen over it and be successful in drying food. It's not rocket science.
Well, I did my little short-term version of it with just my solar oven, the box, with a screen. Well, I had the door propped open just so that the
Yeah.
moisture could evaporate.
Yeah, I mean, people have been drying food for 10,000 years. It's a simple, proven method, and there are a few pitfalls to it, which I'll point out to you. Let me go ahead and take this screen out of here.
Okay.
Now, this is a rack of sun-dried tomatoes. These have been in here for actually about 2 weeks, which is about a week longer than I would prefer to have had them in here. But I'll show you some of the pitfalls here. See this one right here?
Okay.
You got a little bit of mold happening on there.
Ah,
Okay.
all right.
That's a reject. See that one right there? I don't know what causes this. Sometimes they turn black like that. I don't know. So, you're going to lose a few. But basically all this stuff right here, these are dry as, playing
They're
cards.
kind of leathery. Now, is that what you're aiming for
Yeah, you
with
just want them dry.
with a
You can take it, you first put it in your mouth and it kind of just tastes like a piece of cardboard.
yeah.
Just kind of suck on
But
it
then
for a
there's
minute.
tomato. I can taste it. It's got some nice flavor.
I
Nice
have
flavor
some
to
of
it.
these in the house that are from 2006 that are perfectly fine. Now, another thing that I have had some trouble with, and I don't, I'm not a bugologist and all that, but I have had a few times where I've put these in a jar and then I've come back a few weeks later or a year later and I see moths inside the jar. So
I had that in my first
yeah,
last year.
here's my solution to
Okay.
it. I put them all in the jar, and if I got any worries about it, I stick them in the microwave for about 30 seconds.
Okay.
What I do is I take a jar, just like this right here. Here's some zucchini that's from 2008. And this is a really great way to get, a zucchini, how many zucchinis can you eat in a summer? Okay.
That's one of the biggest challenges. What in the heck do you
What do you do with them all?
zucchini?
Well,
Should you put this in soup?
I throw
Casseroles?
them into everything. I mean, you can throw them in an omelet in the morning. You can throw them into anything with liquid in it, and they just puff back up, and it's just, they're awesome. You can use them. You can eat them like potato chips.
What kind of things what else have you dried besides these types of foods? All your fruit, I
everything.
imagine.
I've dried everything, and you can also make jerky as well. I mean, any kind of meat, you slice it thinly. Meat you got to be a little more careful with because you can't allow any flies to get on it because it will blow, the flies will blow it, and you want to make your dryer in such a way that it's as airtight as possible.
Okay.
And that originally was totally airtight. I put
So you had screening everywhere to keep
it was
the
totally,
insects in.
totally
Okay.
insect proof. But basically, pretty much anything, some things tend to dry better than others, and a lot of it has to do with your climate. If you're in a place like here in the foothills of California, the fall is hot and dry and it's breezy. It's ideal. I think if maybe you lived in the Midwest where you had rainy summers, you might have a harder time. I can't speak about that, but
Do you, actually a question back on the sun dryer. Do you have a vent at the top so the moisture can just
Yes.
evaporate outside?
yeah, there's a little hole at the top, and basically you're just creating a chimney effect. You're capturing hot air. The hot air wants to rise, and you give it a place to escape and a place to come in.
And meanwhile, everything's
it
evaporating
flows
from all
through.
through the
Yeah.
screens. And about normally, how long is this going to be usable for in our weather here in the end of
Well-
October, November? Can you dry that late?
I dry things as long as I have things to dry, and typically, we're at the end of the season right now. I still have a few tomatoes out there, a few things, and you can also dry herbs. You can dry your basil, you can dry anything essentially, and I find it just works perfectly. It's just an easy system. At the time your fruit shows up, it's the time of weather that you have to dry things, and it just works perfectly.
Observation is that this takes less of not just fuel energy than canning, but less time
Yes.
in the work process of putting this
Yeah.
together.
One thing that's kind of critical is slicing your stuff. If you do it too thick, then it tends to not dry out well enough. If you make it too thin, then you'll end up with something that's so, when it dries up, there's so little of it that it's kind of worthless.
So about how thick do you
I think
cut?
a 1/4 inch to 5/16 is
Okay.
perfect.
We've got it.
That's what
All
I
right.
found out.
Now I
Simple.
want my sun dryer, honey bunch.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a good way to preserve food, and it works.
Right. Thank you.
I started culturing shiitake mushrooms a few years back, and this has kind of been a worthwhile thing. I have some friends that own some property, and we got some oak logs, and it's really important to get, this is black oak right here. There are different species of oak that you can use, but the timing of this is really important. You want to cut your logs when, in the springtime, when the buds are beginning to swell, but before the leaves have opened.
Okay.
And there's a period of time in there, if you're paying attention, you can get it, but it's important to do that, because the reason is that the sugar in the logs is at the highest point at that point in time.
Okay. Okay.
And so what you do is you buy this mushroom spawn, and there's different varieties of it. Each of these logs have a little metal tag on it, which tells me, I have a little insignia on here, which tells me what variety it is and what year that I planted, and I have a little record book of that.
Okay.
There are different types of the spawn. Some of them are designed for cold weather, warm weather, a wide range. There's different varieties. I've experimented around with all different types, and I've found the ones that work here the best are more the wide range and the warm weather type. But basically you get a big stack of logs and you drill holes. You can see where the holes have been drilled. And actually these, see how these are black right here?
Yeah.
These are not really happy. See these ones right here that are white?
Oh, so it looks like wax, kind of.
Yeah, well, it is wax.
Like.
It is actually wax. And what I've done is you've drilled holes in here and you've packed this spawn in here, which is the mycelium. That's the actual plant.
Okay.
When we see a mushroom, we think that's the plant, but actually that's actually the flower of the plant.
Okay.
So the mushroom is the flower, which you're eating. The mycelium is this spongy, stringy looking stuff. You may have seen it in the forest if you walked and kicked an old log. And what it does is it colonizes the log and it runs through the log and it, it inhabits the log. And when the conditions are right, temperature, humidity, and all this kind of stuff, the mushrooms will flush and you get...
And do they come out the hole, or they just come out
No, they will come out all over the logs.
The logs.
I just had a pretty big flush here a few weeks ago, and I actually think they'll flush again here soon because we're getting some colder weather.
How do they have to stay moist? I mean, see, you've got a shaded place here.
Yeah, I've got a shaded place, and this is actually on a little timer system, and I have these little micro misters, and about 3 times a day this comes on and rains here. You can see how damp it is here.
Yeah, I could
now one of the spoilers for this is that those damp, shady places slugs love. And slugs will graze your mushrooms. You'll come out here in the morning and have a big old fat shiitake with a little trail of
slug goo.
They actually eat it like a cow
really?
eats the grass,
okay.
you know, and they can destroy it. And you can see that this is not, this is tipped over here just recently and I haven't fixed it. But one of the ways that I came up to solve this problem is I had some little stainless steel dishes and I took some bolts, there's one right there, and I drilled them into the bottom of the log. So I made legs for this, and I set it in a pan of water. And
so that way it keeps the slugs from climbing on up into the whole edifice.
It's like a moat around the leg.
Yeah.
And so I think there might be better ways that you could design something, but that's what I came up with. But eventually this failed. Somehow the ground settled and it tipped over. But
well, all the moisture, I could see why.
Yeah.
Well.
But anyway, this has been a pretty worthwhile project. It does take sometimes a year and sometimes even 2 years before you'll see anything from it.
And then how do you preserve the mushrooms?
The way I preserve them is I eat as many as I can till I'm sick of them, and then I'll usually make like 5 gallons of shiitake mushroom soup, and then after that I take the rest out here to the dryer, slice them up, and they dry wonderfully, just like the zucchini and the tomatoes I showed you. You just throw those into an omelet or into your stew or your soup, and shazam, they dry really well, and they taste good just dried. Yeah,
I like them. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one other little thing to show you here. I think everyone should have a kitchen garden. That is just some place close to your house where you can reach out and grab a handful of kale or lettuce or chard or whatever you got going here.
Chives.
So I have this retaining wall here, and what I've kind of decided to do is I looked at a lot of different types of containers, and the thing about container gardening is you're constantly pulling nutrients out of the soil. You'll need to replenish it at some point in time. There's only a small amount there.
Yeah.
So what I found is probably the best bang for my buck is I could buy these 55-gallon plastic recycled drums, and they actually have a little mold line around them. I just take my skill saw, zip them in half, and I make a really nice, they're a nice size, and you can take the soil and dump it back into a wheelbarrow, haul it back to the compost, and just constantly kind of recycle your soil that way.
That's
so just a simple idea, you know, apartment dwellers, people who live in places where you have very poor soil, it's a way of keeping that compost from disappearing into the earth all the time.
That is a really good point.
Yeah.
And I like that it's a manageable size of
Yes.
container that you really could take at the earth and bring back some compost
Yeah.
and not.
I drill a couple holes in it so that, it doesn't flood with water.
Okay.
And you can even in the wintertime, take your soil and dump one on top of the other, and it basically keeps your compost from flooding and leaching away all the time.
So what do you grow in here? I mean, what do you keep close to your kitchen?
It depends on the time of year. Right now we're kind of in a transition. I had a lot of corn growing out here for the summer, but right now this is some Swiss chard, some lettuce. I've got some chives growing here. There's some
herbs.
Yeah, I use these almost every night.
Okay.
Come out here,
okay.
grab a little handful, snip them up in a salad
They're
or a
good.
taco.
They're
or-
good.
Yeah, all through the year. And there's some kale down there. And, I can't resist the Siberian sea berry and the honeyberries and these exotic things that I try once in a while. And it gives you the ability too, if you have a plant that as you go through the year, one place is good for that plant, and then all of a sudden the sun angle changes and it starts frying, you can always pick it up and move it. You know what I'm saying?
From the container.
Right. So
wow.
that honeyberry I had out in the greenhouse in the winter, and it was doing really well. Then it got too hot in there, it started frying, so I carried it over here and put it under the apple tree. It gives you that mobility to move things around.
I like that, a mobile garden.
A mobile garden.
Wow, wow.
One nice thing you can do is take a couple straps and put underneath here and put a stick through the middle and get your partner and just carry it. Works pretty easy.
I am amazed at how much inventiveness.
Yeah.
It's constant with what you're doing.
Yeah, you just figure out ways to do things. I suppose you could get a boom truck, but it'd be pretty expensive.
So let's wrap up. I'd like to go to the barn because you
Okay.
have something fun going there. Take me there.
Okay. There's no magic here that I've done. I've just taken what was here, used a little creativity, and basically tried to give nature what it needs to survive. And I think if everyone would do this and just be conscious of that, it'd be a good thing.
Mark, if we did that all over the planet, we would heal it, we would be back in balance the way we started. And the planet, I think, and everyone on it would be much happier.
I agree. I think there's always about balance. I love my internet, I love my high-tech things and all that, but as well, if you can keep a balance between not getting lost in that stuff and stay grounded, stay in touch with the natural environment, it's very healing. It's very wonderful.
Thank you for this tour. Thank you for the model that you are for everyone. I think you're going to find a lot of folks just saying, I'd like to live like that. Thank you for sharing with us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
You're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.